set for you. Now, we talked a little bit about the forensic sciences in criminal cases already, blood spatter, DNA, tool marks over there, fingerprints, some arson stuff. How do you get up to speed on these sciences? Well, the one good thing is you don't have to go and learn it all right away. Most of the time we're going to learn this case-specific. When you get a case, you're going to have to get up to speed on it. And we're going to talk to you about the resources and how you learn this and master it. The other thing is that Chapter 5 in the NAS report we talked about this morning is like 2- and 3-page summaries of the science and the criticisms. It's beautiful. As Marvin pointed out, it is a gift to defense lawyers because it digests everything. It talks about the history of the discipline, and it tells you its strengths and its weaknesses. So that's a good starting point, but you're going to need to do more. So how do we become specialists and experts in forensic sciences? Well, we do it by engaging in aggressive discovery practice. And Marvin mentioned discovery in our state court systems not being as rigorous as the federal system. I think that's just a matter of time of pointing out to state court judges that they'll waste a lot of time at the time of trial if we don't have a good discovery process. And most of our Rule 16 discoveries in our state systems is modeled off of the federal rule. And there hasn't been much appellate litigation on discovery. There's really just a few cases out there on it. But the ones that are out there are helpful, in fact, to the defense more than they are hurtful about why we should be entitled to discovery. So I'm going to talk to you about aggressive discovery practice, and then Mike and Gene are going to take up about investigation and litigation and how you get up to the science. So investigating and litigating. So if you don't demand more, if you don't ask for more discovery, what are you likely to get? That short, conclusive report with very little information about the findings. That report that just says, I looked at the fingerprint and it was a match. Nothing else. No information beyond that. Sometimes it's filled with some jargon or some technical scientific terms. That is at least an opportunity for you to go look up what those terms mean and investigate it a little more. But there's nothing in these very short, conclusive reports about the testing that in fact happened and what shortcomings there may be in that process or testing. And the flaws, of course, of the science itself aren't in there. So maybe you can pry some out with discovery. Now, in the federal system, it's Rule 16. I use Rule 16 as an example here because, as I said, most of our states are patterned off the federal rule. Now, Rule 16 says that the government must disclose and what the information that's subject to disclosure is. That is E, in Rule 16, documents and objects, F, reports and examinations, and G, expert witnesses. In the state of Colorado, where I moved to now, G is actually, the expert witness portion is put over in sort of a discretionary category outside of the regular rules of discovery, but certainly ones that if you can justify why you need the information, the court should be entertaining the request. And that's, so you will have it in there somewhere. So quickly, just Rule 16, documents and objects. This is huge and expansive in scope. It's about books, papers, documents, data, photographs, tangible objects, buildings and places, copies and portions of any of these. So, this is a pretty expansive rule. And you need to invoke this one to ask for the kinds of documents. And I'm going to walk through a little bit of what kind of documents you may be looking for. That's pretty expansive, and it has all those triggers. The defense has to ask, and the government, has to give it over if it's material to the defense, and the government intends to use it. Reports and examinations and tests. Now, it seems just logical. This is also appealing to a judge who may be enforcing these discovery rules. It appeals to logic that if they did an examination and a test, and they're going to be using it, that you should get all of the information with regard to that test. It just seems kind of obvious. 16F governs those results and reports on the physical, mental examination, scientific tests, and experiments. And it's nice in the federal rule. It says, it's either the government knows or with due diligence should know to turn over to you. And finally, Rule 16, expert witnesses, a wonderful rule that says that you should be given a written summary. And the summary describes the witness's opinions, the basis and reasons for those opinions, and the witness's qualifications. Those are actually very important because that conclusory report I was just talking about, that usually doesn't have the basis of the opinion or the reason why that's their opinion. So that conclusory report would be a violation of Rule 16G, that you didn't get the proper information in order to be put on notice on how to properly defend your client. Rule 16 has a number of rules that actually allow the court to get involved in the discovery process. So when judges are like, oh, that's just between the parties, that's actually Rule 16, and most of the state rules that are patterned off it actually do invite the court into to administering over discovery. That is, issuing protective and modifying orders, punishing for failures to comply. If there is a failure to comply, the courts can order a time and a place and a manner that discovery should be conducted on. The court can grant a continuance. We know they never like to grant continuances because that slows down the train. They can prohibit the party from introducing undisclosed evidence. When I went to the public defender's office in D.C., evidence blocking was one of the very first things they taught us. That's one of the most important things that you could be doing is blocking evidence in a case, because then you don't have to defend against it or come up with an excuse, and it's one piece of the puzzle that it may be missing there. So, failure to comply with discovery and giving you notice might get you the best gift of all, and that is evidence blocked out by the court for failure to comply with the rules. And there's a great catch-all for judges, which is any other just order under the circumstances. So it's a huge catch-all. If the judge doesn't think the discovery process has been fair, then you may benefit from that with any kind of order from the court. Now, discovery requests, of course, have to be done in writing. That's what everybody here should be doing. You should be citing whatever your applicable case law is in your area that governs disclosure. Most jurisdictions will have a case on point that just says, roughly what the parameters are, that it has to be in writing and maybe at the time that it needs to be given on. And make sure you're including in these requests that you're constitutionalizing the issue. You're asking for it because of Fifth Amendment and Sixth Amendment concerns that you have. And you're asking for it under Brady, because very well some of this information may be Brady, that the government has an obligation to turn over. So constitutionalize your request for this information. It is a due process concern that we know what the government's evidence is here in terms of the forensic science in the case, so that we'll be able to actually be able to rebut it or question it. It is a Fifth Amendment due process question. And it's a Sixth Amendment question. My client has a right to present a defense. He has a right to counsel in this case. I need to know. I have a duty to investigate. I can go up on IAC if I don't investigate. This is something that I need to know whether I need to counter it. So what do you need to know for discovery? I have a 3-year-old. We're just getting into the time when we're watching Sesame Street. And so, it occurred to me that, maybe I should just sort of distill this down to 5 P's that you just need to keep in mind with discovery. And the 5 P's are production of materials, you want preservation of materials, you want process information, you want procedures information, and you want personnel and lab materials. These are the 5 categories that I'm most concerned with when I'm thinking about discovery. Production of materials, what am I talking about? I'm talking about all discoverable information. I want the case file, the complete records. Now, unfortunately, some of these fingerprint cases, it's going to consist of that one short little report. It's going to be nothing in there. But when we're talking about DNA, we're talking about a file that has a great deal of information. And so don't be satisfied if you are in a jurisdiction where all they turn over is 1 page of the comparison they did to the known to the evidence sample, and it's a match to 600 quadrillion. There is an entire case file with data and electronic material that you need to review in order to properly defend this case. So I'm talking about documents. I want bench notes. I want communication logs to probe that confirmation bias question that Marvin said about what information are they getting from the police, because all these labs get it. They get the initial case narrative about how bad your client is and how many people are saying your client did it before they test anything. And that's in our gold standard DNA. And so we want to know the communication log. We want the worksheets, printout, error logs. If they videotaped, and some do, videotape the experiments that were going on or film. We want to see photographs. Sometimes they photograph the evidence before it's being having a cutting taken out of it. We want it in color so we can see if there is staining. We don't want electronic data. We want raw data, diagrams, sketches, database, draft reports, and any kind of source information. This is what I do with attorneys all over the country. I help them do the DNA analysis sort of anew. Once I get all the information, I get the electronic data, I put it in the software that we have, the same software the lab uses, and reanalyze what was done. And we go over everything that was done in the case to make sure we know what the basis of the opinion is. You want preservation of material, and this is really important. You want to make a specific request in writing that the government not alter or consume testable evidence. This is an important part of discovery because you're at least identifying what kind of evidence there is in the case and making sure that it's not being destroyed. DNA, it's really important there's not some destruction or consumption of DNA. In fingerprint, there are better techniques. And maybe you're just learning that through the discovery process of whether they used the contrasting powder technique, which is inferior to the superglue testing method, where they heat up superglue and it it bonds to the very fragile print and they get a better print out of it. Through the discovery process of talking about preservation, you may be learning some things that are going to strategically help you out about cross-examining how the fingerprint was collected. You want process information. You want to make a specific request that the testing be performed to reduce the possibility of contamination according to the best state-of-the-art techniques. So you're going to be asking for a process. What was the process? And you may also in your discovery request be making some statements about that the process should be one in which they're using the best techniques possible. So there's that. Procedures information. This is critically important to many of your challenges to understand what it is that the forensic analyst may have used to come out with the opinion that they did. You want procedures information. And you need to make a specific request for standard operating procedures of laboratories. Many of these laboratories, since they may be accredited in this voluntary accreditation process with ASCLD, actually have to generate a standard operating procedure or an SOP. Because they have an SOP, you should be able to get that and see what their procedures are. Maybe you'll find out that they aren't following their procedures. You may have somebody who's able to look at these procedures and tell you that these procedures are lacking in important components with regard to guidance for the analyst. You want training and user manuals. I litigated a fingerprint case in the District of Columbia, and our analyst had a high school education. She had been there for 15 or 20 years, and we knew her credentials were very shaky. But she was a member of the IAI, so she paid her dues, once a year for that. It wasn't clear entirely whether she'd ever been to a conference and what she was learning. But so I wanted to know how she was trained and what the training manual was. And so we asked the court to enforce. We asked in discovery. The government didn't turn it over. The lab didn't turn it over. And the court one afternoon said, I want to see what this training manual looks like. And so they run across the courtyard. They come back with this 3-ring binder that's all yellowed and brown. No one had picked up this training manual in 25 years. It is, loose leaf pages are stuck coming out of it, and the judge took one look at that, laughed a little bit to himself, and excluded the expert. And said, this is ridiculous. This is, they claim they have a training manual. It's obvious to me no one's using this as a training manual. And so, there was our win by forcing their hand to show what their training manual was, which really was nothing. We want quality assurance manuals. That's how you find out how many errors are going on in the lab. This is something that is well worth pursuing. They usually try to tie it just to your case, and we checked positive controls and negative controls. Nothing was the problem, well, how many errors happen? How many times does a lab analyst DNA get into a sample in your laboratory to show that contamination happens? So quality assurance manuals can be very helpful, as are quality control manuals. Finally, personnel and lab materials. You need to make a specific request in writing for their licenses, certificates of accreditation, audit report documents. Sometimes they have proficiency tests. We want contamination records and logs, control records, validation studies, documents on the instrument maintenance. We want resumes, CVs, job descriptions, proficiency test results, and explanation of instruments used. If you are going to understand what it is that went into the testing and the qualifications of the expert or so-called expert the government is going to be calling, and you're going to be prepared to cross-examine, you're going to need to know the answers to these questions. So that's my shtick. It is simple. It is discovery, discovery, discovery. That is the first component on how you get up to speed on the science. That's how you learn what the process is. That's how you learn what the procedures are that go into it. That's how you learn how good the personnel are. And along the road, you'll pick up some hints to know how best to preserve or what the best process is, and you'll become like the mini expert in your office. So you've done it in a case, and so now the next case, they'll come down to you in the hall, and they'll say, you know, you're the fingerprint expert. What should we be looking for? What should we be asking for? And that's how this all starts. That's how you grow.